Hello and welcome everyone to this FBH Family Business Histories webinar. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all amongst us today. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Adel A. I'm the General Manager of the Tharawat Family Business Forum, and it's a great pleasure for me to guide you through today's session. Before we get started, of course, we know that everybody is an expert at Zoom nowadays, but in case you have any trouble, please feel free to contact our team members. You can, of course, adjust your Zoom view as you wish for this webinar, and we really encourage you to contribute and participate in today's conversation through the chat or the Q&A functions, and we hope to have a lively conversation for the next hour or so all together. So before we deep dive into today's session, I would like to quickly introduce the Family Business Histories project for those of you who have not joined us before. FBH is a collaborative project between the Tharawat Family Business Forum and New York University, Abu Dhabi. So it's a very interesting and dynamic partnership that really results in a quite unique project that tries to map and to analyze and understand the historical significance of family businesses in the MENA countries. So MENA is Middle East and North Africa. So how do we do that? We really try to compile, document, and analyze the history, legacy, and of course, the socioeconomic impact of family businesses in the GCC MENASA region, as I said before. But concretely, what are our goals? So we have 4 goals that we are pursuing with our project. The first one, which is a very lofty one, but we're trying our best to understand the history. So academic research is being conducted into a better understanding of the impact of family businesses on the regional economy. The second one is really centered around this concept of legacies. We are looking to highlight each family's legacy and economic impact, not just actually for the wider community, but very often for the family itself as well. Then there's a lot of effort that we put into kind of having conversations around preserving heritage. We obviously live in a region that has seen a lot of movement and a lot of disruption as well, which often leads to kind of losing ties with the past and losing ties with what has built our legacies. And we try as a project to do our bit to contribute to preserving these heritages. And last but not least, perhaps one of the most important things that we want to do with this project and through this project is really kind of conduct research that benefits today's and tomorrow's business leaders in contextualizing their decision-making and what they are working on today in today's context, of course. So I'm very happy to announce actually that we have some new features on our FBH website. So we've just recently launched an article series. So it's the first time that we've done that. And this article series features contribution from people from all around the world and from the region, of course, who comment on this question of family business history and legacies in our region. So we would like to invite you to visit this site. And as we, over the next couple of months, we will regularly add more insight pieces from experts from around the world. The second news announcement is that we now have a trailer available on our website, which summarizes also the concept and the thought and the vision behind our project as well. You will find a link to both of those in your chat right now. So as we move forward, we would like to really invite you all to follow us on our LinkedIn page, where you can find a lot of the latest updates of the project. And of course, our website is always there with a growing number of documents and insights. So without any further ado, I'd like to get to the core part of our session today, the founding story of the Alsuhaimi Group. And we have the pleasure of welcoming our key speaker, Mr. Adel Alsuhaimi, who is an author, who has written a fascinating book about his family business, but also the CEO at the Adel Alsuhaimi Business Bureau in Saudi Arabia. And with him, I would also like to invite Martin Klimke, Professor Martin Klimke from NYU Abu Dhabi, to come online. Martin is, of course, the co-director of FBH, and we will be moderating this session together. Welcome, Martin, also.
Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Welcome, Mr. Adel. It's a pleasure to have you with us. I will just ask you to unmute yourself.
Sure.
There you go. Welcome, sir. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
It was mine. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So you have prepared a short introductory presentation for us, and so we will hand over to you to guide us through the history of your family business, and then we will come back and have a chance to speak with each other and interact with the audience and address some of the core questions that perhaps you have encountered also whilst you have written the book about your family business. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the great introduction, and I would like to start by thanking everybody for the chance to share this story with you and with anybody who is interested in the family business topics. The story started approximately 175 years ago, during a time when Saudi Arabia was really in a time of lawlessness between two dynasties. The second Saudi dynasty diminishing because of so many factors, internal and political, as well as international, and the factions that are prevalent in Saudi Arabia who were trying to get hold of territory and try to do their bidding in trying to get control of the land. That's when everybody at that time, not only my grandfather, but many others from Najd region, interior of Saudi Arabia, were forced to migrate north, go to Iraq or the Levant, other countries like Syria and Jordan, and try to just make a living, trying to survive and make sure that they have at least a sustainability for their families. My reason for establishing and publishing this book was primarily a wish of my father, the late Adel Alsuhaimi, who mentioned in many occasions that he wanted to group his photo collection as well as many anecdotes that happened during his life, in the phase of his life when he was in Jubail between 1929 and 1952, and tried to put it in a sort of a small light book that would be easy to read for our grandchildren to find out exactly how their fathers and great-grandfathers lived before them. And it was his wish that he mentioned many times during his life. And I, to be very honest, was very busy at that time. And we did not really have time to sit down and discuss the details or exactly how much he wanted to make as a detail or as a body of the book. So it was postponed until, unfortunately, his passing away in 2015, after which I made sure that I will set aside everything and try to sit down and fulfill his wish. As soon as I started, things become more and more clear on how things were conducted and how things unfolded in the family. And because of the detailed nature of my study and my scope, trying to go deep and find out exactly the reasons for different events and different decisions made at that time. It wasn't really an easy job, trying to sit in the mindset of somebody who lived nearly a century ago and try to find out exactly what was the precursor events or reasons that he had in order to take that route instead of this route is something that needs to be evaluated very, very carefully. In order to do that, I had to do something on parallel basis for, besides writing the manuscript for the book, is trying to do a historical research and find out exactly how the area evolved. And you had to study that from a political point of view, a military point of view, economic point of view, and find out exactly all these culminating elements. How did they interact with each other and created the environment where my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and others from Najd faced, like famines, epidemics, pandemics, military blockades, warring factions, tribal raids, and try to find out exactly whether their decisions were accurate or not accurate, or did they have to change their course later on. And that's what really took time. So I started in 2014 or so, and by 2016 I had a good manuscript at that time, but with a very long list of references that I have to gather and documents that need to be dug out. And the problem with that is that the resources that I have to use are scattered between Riyadh, Kuwait, Bahrain, and the Ottomans, Turkey, because they control everything. Egypt is another one, because they control what was the Turkish archives were. So trying to contact all these entities and try to get what I need is not something easy, and it wasn't really a very simple matter. I had to do this myself. I had to do the footwork, phone calls and emails, or maybe letters are not really sufficient to find out what they have. And then if what they have contains what I need, and then obtain the documents or the photographs and get permissions to use it and publish it. So all this chain of events that need to be done had to be taken very seriously and very adamantly, so to speak. I had to be very persistent, to the point that being blunt sometimes, in order to get things done. Going to places like Kuwait and to go to Riyadh for a couple of days or a week was simple enough. But trying to go to Turkey or go to Egypt and then find out somebody who knows someone who can get access to this, it's a different ballgame. But anyway, what's good now is that it has been done, and the original scope got broadened so much that I thought it has become a very good piece of information to help, first of all, people who are interested in histories and people who are interested in entrepreneurship and the topic of how those pioneers were able to make it. And that's what really is the crux of the matter of this particular webinar. So it started with a wish from my father, and it ended up with a historical, political, economic sort of a study, a mini study of the area of the Middle East and MENA to a certain degree. And I hope, inshallah, that people who have read it and given reviews in Amazon and Goodreads and Barnes and Noble were able to convey the message that it can be helpful and it can be used as a reference for people who are interested in these topics.
Absolutely. Would you like to share your screen and perhaps walk us through that story and that journey that you have created for us?
Sorry about that. Okay. It will be, the presentation is composed of very main sections, introduction, and then in the eye of the grandsons, then Al Saud dynasty's slide, then the pioneers town of Jubail and the Dammam hometown. So this is my grandfather on the right with Bin Jloui, the Prince of Al-Hassa, opening a big power plant serving the Eastern province. That was back in 1965. And you see the Aramco officials in the back, in the second seat, in the second row. In our eyes, my grandfather was a huge person to us. He was seen as someone is above description or above reproach, to be very honest. He was somebody who is very well known. He was known for his community service. He helped so many others, whether it was in the community or in the government, assisting the governors in their pursuit, especially when it was in Jubail. Jubail was a very modern, very recent city. It was built in 1911. And by the time he was there, it was only 9 years old. So they did not really have the government that is needed to run the show. And the ruler or the governor at that time was assisted by my grandfather as well as others in the town to help him in different aspects, like maybe arbitration between people who are in different commercial disputes or feudal problems, family feuds, and the like. So he was somebody who is very well known for his wisdom and for his very good logical knowledge of the people of the tribes. So he was able to really provide the governors with something that they needed, assistance. And it went along, and even after he moved from Jubail to Dammam, the same thing applied, because word of mouth is positive and very great and reaches very far. And Bin Jloui in Dammam, as well as the others afterwards, again sought the assistance of my grandfather in order to help with different aspects of government. So he was very well respected, he was very well heard, and his opinion was weighted very highly by the governors. And we saw him from that perspective. We looked at him as somebody who is a giant, a big, above can anybody describe. These are pictures and photographs of my great-grandfather on the far left. And then the top one is my grandfather, Abdulrahman, with his lifelong friend, Muhammad Al-Ghabi, who is also, again, my grandfather from the mother side. And they lived together almost 60 plus years, never separated. They always go together, come together, and they are referred to as the brothers in Jubail as in Dammam. The last one, the one at the bottom, it's for myself and my brother Musa'ad, and the center is grandfather Abdulrahman back in 1964. And the one article clipping on the right-hand side is for opening a public library in Dammam, which was by the efforts of individuals, merchants, and normal people. And he was chosen to inaugurate the opening. This slide is one of the slides that I have used in different other consultancies and other research that I have done for others. And it contains the three dynasties of Saudi Arabia. It lists very briefly and very straightforwardly when it was established, when did it fail, and a very brief about why did it fail. It gives a glimpse of time and gives you a very quick reference of where our story of my great-grandfather and father and grandfather happened to be during that time. And the major phase was the one between the second Saudi dynasty and the third one, because there was lawlessness and things deteriorated so fast after the second Saudi dynasty because of the feuding between the sons of Imam Faisal bin Turki Al Saud. He had 4 sons, and the 4 sons, Faisal, Abdulrahman, Muhammad, and Saud, disagreed between themselves. 2 of them went to Al-Rashid of the Prince of Hayy, who was supported by the Ottomans, whereas Faisal and Abdulrahman lined up with the British. And because of these differences, they started fighting each other. And that's where the Saudi dynasty diminished. Okay, and at the end, bin Rashid took over and kicked Al Saud out. They had to go to Qatar for a while, then Bahrain, and then settled in Kuwait back in, I think, 1885 or so. And they settled there until they started the third resurrection of Saudi dynasty, the Saudi dynasty in 1902. So during that period, between 1985 and 1902, that's where my grandfather was born. He was born in 1899. And during that period, lawlessness prevailed. Might is right, so to speak. And things got out of hand, and it was so bad that most of the inhabitants of the interior of Saudi Arabia sought refuge somewhere else. They cannot move everybody, and they cannot take their sons and daughters and wives and the extended family, because it will be a burden and it will cost money and it will be very cumbersome. So what they had to do is simply have the strongest of the men and their sons go and seek employment or seek trade or seek any other means of survival, and try to establish themselves elsewhere and send money and commodities and goods and stuff like that they need to Najd as a trade as well as assistance for their families. And that's why this slide is very important. I refer to it in the book often, because it helps the reader to find out why we are going back and forth in events to highlight these moments. This is a slide about the Jubail, the pioneer town. In it, you can see the aerial survey plane that Aramco brought to Jubail. That was back in 1953. And at that time, Jubail was small. It wasn't that big. It was only about 20 years since it was established. And they used to land in the outskirts of Jubail, where it's a flat land, sort of a sabta, we call it in Arabic. They used to do it there, land and then tow the plane back to the inner souk area, which is at the bottom of the slide, because it's a very flat area and it has sort of a compacted soil that the airplane can land and take off from. On the left-hand side, that's my father in 1942. He was only 15 years old, and he attended the Al Jubail school soccer team. I thought it was appropriate, since we have the World Cup, to show that it has been in the family for about 80 years or so. So it was a slide that was enjoyable for everybody that I have showed in the earlier days. At the bottom, it's the souk area where everybody comes in. They are not allowed to take their camels into the souk area. They have to land at there. And then the emir and the custom officer of the emir would come, check the merchandise, decide what custom duties has to be applied, and then charge them before they are allowed to take their merchandise to the market and sell it to the merchants, who in turn sell it to the public. So this is a slide about the Jubail town, which gives you a glimpse of what was transpiring there. This is one of the community services that my grandfather has taken upon him after he moved from Jubail to Dammam in 1954. In it, you can see from the left to the right, 1967, switching on of a new Dammam electric substation. The one in the middle, 1965, inauguration of electric generating plant for the Eastern Province. The third photograph is 1963, signing of the contract for Eastern Province water system, both supply as well as sewer system. And the last one in the far right is the first geologist, about I think 16 or 17, with technicians, pilots, and others who arrived in Jubail in 1932. And when they arrived in Jubail, they were given a big sort of a palace at that time. It's a residence by Al-Qassim family. Al-Qassim family is very well connected with King Abdulaziz. He is considered to be one of the best supporters of King Saud from Al-Hassa region. And he had a big farm and a residence in Jubail. And he availed it for the use of the geologists based on the request of King Abdulaziz. So they came there, they established their headquarters in Jubail, and they started using Jubail as their base and moved from Jubail inland by either cars or by the plane for surveying and finding out the best locations for probable exploration wells or oil wells. This is a slide. And then this is my father in early 1960s, doing some drilling water wells, as well as sampling wells for Ras Tanura refinery. He was with Mr. Dan Wells, engineer Dan Wells, a geologist from Houston, Texas, a good close friend of the family as well. This is another one from different locations and times in Dammam, from drilling of water wells in multiple Saudi islands in the Arabian Gulf in 1970s, to myself with others of my management staff inspecting those locations in 2005. In 1972, my grandfather was opening a paint manufacturing plant in Dammam in 1972. And the last one is, unfortunately, I cannot see you. I cannot remember what was that, the last one on the right-hand side. But anyway, you can see a photograph of Jubail Souk. This Jubail Souk is the one on the perimeters of the big land of main Jubail Souk, the one I showed about 3 or 4 slides back. It was just like a corridor with the shops on the left-hand side, and people would move inside the shed to avoid the sun or avoid the rain whenever it comes, and be able to do trade, buy or sell or do both. And what is interesting in this is that if you see the columns on the right-hand side of the photo, these columns are also used for something else, which is far less admirable, to be very honest. They used it to tie people to it in case there was a punishment, a social punishment. if there was a thief, for instance, or something that was unsocial, then they would tie the person with the sentence in these columns so that everybody can see him, and someone will give him or tell the people why he was sent to this punishment. Because punishment is very, very vital to the society over that time, because of, as I said, lack of, because of lawlessness. And it has to be a very harsh justice sometimes. So this is what I have for this. And
wonderful.
Any questions or anything from your side, please.
Of course. Thank you so much, Mr. Adel. So first of all, I mean, it's fascinating to really get an insight, a glimpse, let's say, of, you know, this very complex history. And what I really like a lot is the fact that you managed to kind of give us context, historical context of the challenges that were happening in in Saudi Arabia around the turn of the century, so between the 19th and the 20th centuries, which I think is something that we underestimate today, right? We are not really aware of how difficult life was and how complex life was at that time. So before we deep dive into our conversation, I would love to just ask you if you could design for us, you know, in as simple as possible. I know it's a very complex story, but what's the entrepreneurial journey that your grandfather did? So was your great-grandfather already entrepreneurial? Was it something that he inherited from his father? What drove him to kind of get started and become such an important, business person in the region?
Well, my great-grandfather wasn't really a merchant, per se. He was a farmer, and he specialized in farming, taking care of farms, and specifically digging water wells and digging it manually at that time. We are talking about something in the 1880, 1890. He wasn't really into trading. What really pushed him into the sector is need. Taking care of farms and making sure that he cultivate the land, irrigate it, take care of it, and then take whatever produce and take it to the market and sell it, was not really making enough money for him as well as his family, extended family. And that's why his brother, Sulaiman Alsuhaimi, brother of my great-grandfather, decided to go for sort of academia. He was a scholar. And he specialized in religious studies. And he was picked up by King Abdul Aziz in the 1920s, as among other Saudis from Najd, that King Abdul Aziz wanted to take them to the West, to Jeddah and Mecca. And the reason for that, Abdul Aziz has just opened Mecca and Jeddah. And he found that the type of Islamic model that was left behind by the Ottomans wasn't the one that is really the one that was given to us by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And therefore, he wanted to put back the actual Islam back into the homes of the Hijazis. And he picked up few. Among them was Sulaiman, my uncle, my great uncle, and took them to Mecca. And then after a debriefing, so to speak, over there, they dispersed them all over the West Coast, from Al-Gimfa in the south, to Yamba, to Al-Wajh, to Quba. And he wanted to make sure that the actual original interpretation of Islam is conveyed to the people of Hijaz, who had been under the influence of the Ottomans for so long and had a mutated version of Islam, if I can put it very politely. So that's why Saleh, my great-grandfather, wasn't really in merchandise and trading and commercialization. He was a pragmatic man who specialized in farming, who knows his field very well. He knows how to dig wells and to protect plants and do a good farming product. The problem is that everybody at that time was so poor that nobody was willing or even capable of paying his fees to have their farms or lands cultivated and taken care of. And that's why by 1915, things were really bad. King Abdul Aziz, who started in 1902, has just lost a battle in 1915 called Jarab Battle. Jarab Battle was fought against Bin Rashid of Hayy. And in that particular battle, which took place, I think, January 1915, the main British officer who was assisting Abdul Aziz, King Abdul Aziz, Captain William Shakespeare, was killed. He was the only one in the Abdul Aziz army who was able to operate the only cannon they had. So he was killed almost at the very beginning of the battle. In addition to that, one of the major flanks that was protecting I think it was the right flank of King Abdul Aziz army, was manned by one of the tribes who are ultra-Orthodox Muslims. And when they noticed that there is a British officer assisting Abdul Aziz, they sort of mutinized and they betrayed Abdul Aziz and withdrew. When they withdrew, the right flank of Abdul Aziz army was exposed, khalas. And that's why Bin Rashid came over with his army and really massacred the Abdul Aziz army and his compatriots. That's why after about 6 months, another battle was fought, but this time it was in Al-Hasad, because Abdul Aziz wanted to take revenge against the same tribe that betrayed him. Again, he was defeated. He wasn't able to defeat them, and he was wounded in a very bad wound. And his brother Sa'ad bin Abdulrahman was also murdered. He was killed in the battle. He was barely taken from the battle in order to save his life by a Subai tribe, who really saved his life. So based on all of these events, you can see that at that time, people in Najd were not really secure. Yeah. And they were really feeling the effects of lawlessness.
Yeah.
It was something that they cannot really push back. He has to leave in order to seek something to feed his family. The only problem with all of this is that he had to take Abdulrahman with him, not to assist him, but rather to protect Abdulrahman from revenge killings, which I have mentioned in the book with detail. And he wanted to make sure that he doesn't leave his eldest son behind in a town that is not protected by law. That's why he decided to take him with him.
To take him.
Yes. This is how it happened. So he wasn't really a merchant, and he wasn't rich by any means.
Any means, yeah.
Yes, and he wanted to go in order to survive. That's it.
This is fascinating, obviously. And I think one of the things that I've been curious also when you're reading your book, you have in the process, and you talked about it, consulted so many archives, in multiple countries, and, really went on this journey. What did you discover about your family business history by consulting these other sources of information and documentation? What was the biggest surprise, that you weren't aware of? Because we all have obviously ideas about, parent and grandparent generations, but what struck you the most by consulting these external sources of information?
Well, actually, there is plenty of surprises, to be very straightforward. There was plenty. One of the major things is that I was thinking that Saleh, my great-grandfather, and his son Abdulrahman took that trip with all the risks involved in order to just get more merchandise to something that they are already used to. And it wasn't the case. It was just the opposite. They were so poor, that's one, and they did not really have any alternative other than to leave. And besides all of this, because of the lawlessness, it dictated that Abdulrahman cannot stay alone, and he has to go with him.
Of course.
It wasn't choice that he went with his father to Al-Basra and Zubair, and then stayed in Kuwait for about 7 or 8 years. It wasn't a choice. It was something that was superimposed on Saleh. That's one. The other thing is that I was thinking that since they resided in Kuwait, why didn't they stay there? Kuwait was by far more advanced. They had very good infrastructure. They had good government. Britain was supporting them and safeguarding them. Why shouldn't they stay there? That's when I discovered the second big surprise, is that King Abdulaziz blockaded Kuwait in 1923. And the blockade, economic blockade, took place until 1937. So we are talking about 14 years of economic blockade, which left the Kuwaitis penniless. I mean, they were so poor, and they had really tough times because of that blockade. And that's the expectancy of that blockade is what drove my grandfather, Abdulrahman, to migrate from Kuwait in 1920 to Jubail to seek refuge. That's one. To promote the merchandise of the Kuwaitis, which they have accumulated over years. So this is the third surprise. Yeah, there was so many others. I can go on and on, but consulting these archives did really enlighten my path.
Well, let me just follow up briefly, sorry, Mr. Adel, because we have a question from the audience actually asking about these archives and asking which archives you were impressed with, perhaps in the region, and which ones did you visit them all in person? Some of them sound very old-fashioned and where you probably needed to kind of negotiate your way in, and others might have been very sophisticated. Can you give us a small impression of which ones, but perhaps also for the families online, that might want to do some research on their own families? What would you recommend?
Well, the number one source, which is very reliable, that's one, and very authentic is the second, is King Abdulaziz library in Riyadh. It is one of the best that I have seen. They have very well indexed documentation. They had, or they still have, a department for translation. They can translate documents from Turkish to Arabic and to English.
Wow.
And everything is indexed and digitized, to the point that if you find anything, you can scroll it and find it and print it on the spot. And you can index it by either key names or key terms or key events or even years, And it is one of the best that I have seen.
Impressive.
Yeah, the second one, from a photograph's point of view, is Aramco. And Saudi Aramco is huge by every single meaning of the word. And they have been very cooperative. They they really extended a very good time and effort for almost a week. And they dedicated 2 of their staff to work with me in order to scroll over thousands and thousands of photographs to find out exactly what is relevant for that particular year's era.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yes.
That's really impressive. So these 2 would
one,
be recommended for anyone in the region really to use.
Absolutely. The third one is Kuwait.
Oh.
And in Kuwait, what I found to be very interesting and very informative is the mission of the American, I think it's the American hospital in the States. It was a church-oriented setup that was established, I think, 1910 or 1911. And they established the first hospital in the region for the American mission with a church. Mm-hmm. It was a little bit resisted at the beginning by the locals. However, there was an incident where one of the small daughters, young daughters of Mubarak al-Sabah, before his demise, was born blind. And they sought everything and they weren't able to cure her. And they were not able or willing to give a try for the American mission. But eventually, because they couldn't find any other place to do it, they consulted with the Americans, who diagnosed the problem, ordered some medication from the States, and treated her. And within, I think, few months of the treatment, she started seeing again. And as soon as that happened, Mubarak al-Sabah was willing to offer a fully fledged service to allow the mission to operate in Kuwait, expand their hospital, and make sure that they are treated with respect and with the proper manners. So that one is another source.
Very interesting.
Incredible. Yes, it was incredible.
Really helpful.
The fourth one is Qatar.
Okay.
Qatar Library, I think it's called Qatar Library or Qatar Archives.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they are quite useful and resourceful. And if they don't have the thing that you need, they will be able to forward you or direct you, support you, point you to the right direction.
To other people. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that, sir. I think let's use the last 10 minutes perhaps of our time together to look a little bit about kind of lessons that we can take from, your research and also from the founding story of your family business, because obviously it's a very, very impressive family business still today, but also the journey from, if you imagine in today's context, a father and the son in very dire circumstances, having to leave their home to kind of search for opportunity and kind of being at the source of such a success story. So what learning points have you personally taken, or have you also been able to share with your family from this journey that you've been able to document? So what can we learn from this history?
Well, there's so many things that can be learned from just reading about the history. The only problem is how to convince the new generation to read. That's one. And the other thing is that when they read, I wish they can just read as well as analyze and try to be a little bit engaging, finding out exactly why is this done, why this course of action instead of this course of action, and try to debate these different alternatives that took place 100 plus years ago. But one of the major things that I wanted this book to really highlight is that we were not given sort of a golden spoon of coming into life. It wasn't the case. the grandfather as well as the great-grandfather had to really work very hard and to meet so many challenges and so many risks taken and odds that they had to overcome in order to achieve what they are enjoying today. So they shouldn't take it lightly and be a little bit more thrifty in trying to deal with their wealth. Not open-ended type of expenditure and enjoyment without looking at how to save and how to expand the wealth and further transfer it to the next generation that they have. So this is the main thing that we
main lesson.
Yeah, that's the main lesson that we would like to convey, and I hope inshallah it will be the case.
So I think what's really important to understand, and also in the course of our project, obviously one of the points that we try to research is, you know, the collective impact also of family businesses on the macroeconomic evolution of the region. And if we look at a story like your grandfather's, is kind of a very impressive, and yet we've seen these stories before, right? We've seen these kind of entrepreneurs that are able to overcome incredible odds to kind of create legacies that last for generations. So I would love to ask you, in the regional economy, what do you see? How do you see the role of family businesses going forward? You know, clearly they have been essential in shaping our economic infrastructure. Where are we today, and how would you see from your research, what can you draw that we can use to understand the future a little better?
Well, the way I see it is that the family businesses performed a very important role in the past. They were able to dissipate the wealth, so to speak, into the society by employing others. When you employ farmers, farm hands, and give them their daily salaries or weekly salaries, or you are dispersing wealth from yourself to others, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different houses or households, and make sure that they can sustain themselves and sustain their families. And that's what we have been doing in the past. When the kingdom was established, it was a very poor country, as you very well know. And there wasn't any major source of income besides, of course, the livestock, camels, sheep, and the like, as well as whatever is meagerly available from the Hajj and Umrah when they come for Hajj and Umrah, which is a religious occasions. So going forward to 1953, 1958, when the first oil well was discovered, things have changed. The dynamics of the earnings of Saudi Arabia has shifted dramatically, and there become a source of income which is sustainable and in very high demand, and things are beginning to look brighter. The unfortunate thing is that when we started the export in 1959, the first export from Ras, it was immediately followed by the Nazis overcoming Poland and going through the beginning of the World War II. That caused the whole thing, the scenario, the whole picture to be frozen. Because the Americans and the British and France, the Allied, decided that whatever is in Saudi Arabia is too attractive to explore while the Nazi is in our midst. So they decided to say, wait, we cannot do this. We have something more important as a priority, is trying to stop the Nazi. And we are trying to make sure that he is contained. That's why they mothballed all the structures and the water wells and the exploration in Saudi Arabia for almost 6 years. And they again started in 1946. That's when the refinery was completed and things started to look better. Now, going from 1946 until 1970 and 1980, there was so many other things that have happened in the political arena. There was Arab nationalism in the 50s, 60s, and the beginning of the 70s. Then there was the Ayatollah Khomeini and the religious wars that erupted between Iraq and Iran, and then the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. So many other things that has happened, where at that time the welfare state of the region no longer become a valid model that you can use. Welfare was good after the oil has started, okay? But as soon as you build the government and make sure that you have an income which is sustainable and able to spend and make some kind of social safety nets, then you have to switch over to something more valid and more appropriate for the times. And that's where the family businesses come. The family businesses should be and should become the major employer of the regimes in all of the Arab nations. They have to be given the priority to make sure that they can work in a government, in the economy, and make sure that they are given the chance to operate with a good legal framework, and make sure that the taxation and the other fee structure that you can reach out with is comparable to whatever earnings that you can receive. You cannot overtax and overburden them with expenses and expect them to go ahead and employ citizens. So they have to come up with some kind of a formula that is fair to the merchants and the businessmen and the private sector holders, as well as the governments who are seeking to switch over from a welfare state to a more capitalist state.
I think that's a fascinating insight. So the challenge we have is time, because we have some fascinating comments from the audience that I think would warrant actually a whole other webinar, Mr. Adel. So we'll probably have to invite you back to discuss this in more detail. But I think I just want to pick, just for general understanding, kind of some of the comments that this has provoked. So the first question, and you can answer with a yes or no, all the corresponding letters and pictures that you have mentioned, are they in your book? Are they available in your book?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
And if there is no picture or anything, there is a reference where you can find it.
Where you can find it. Fantastic. We have put a link to your book in the chat, so everybody is able to obtain a copy, and we can really recommend it. Our team has read it, and it's really a fantastic kind of deep dive, I would call it, into a fascinating story. The second question, which also I think we will keep it very short, but I think it's interesting, is how has your family reacted to the book, and are you using it in your company to convey the understanding of the heritage of the family business?
Well, I'll be very honest and straightforward. The reaction is mixed at best. Some approved of it and thought it was a good idea, and some did not really find it appealing, and they weren't very positive about it or trying to convey it to their sons and other family members. And the main reason for that is that we have been exposed to a narrative for so long that didn't really depict the truth 100%. Okay? And when you bring something which is truth-oriented and document supported with all the things that go with it, not everybody will be pleased, because they used to a narrative that is suiting their image of themselves. And then when you bring something which is true and bare, there is no touch-up or makeup, then it gives you the person who is very blunt and who is not really very likable at times. But the people who are educated normally and very highly respected, they look at it very professionally and they think it's amazing.
It's valuable.
Exactly.
Yep.
Whereas the people who are less and from sort of quote unquote the old guard, they wouldn't look at it very, very positively. So it was a mixed reaction. Mixed
reaction, yeah, which I think is natural, right? Because you are doing something that kind of is a very personal journey as well for everyone. So I think that's normal. Before I hand over to Martin to close the session, I just want to highlight one comment that we have received to see how impactful these conversations are can be, and it's a commentary from someone who says that their family business was not able to kind of grow because of mismanagement, and how do you sustain a family business across all of these external disruptions, but then also the internal challenges in the family business. And I think what you are showing us is that one aspect that can be helpful, other than the typical governance and professionalization of the company, it's also kind of an honest exchange with each other about our legacy and what our legacy is built on. So I would like to really, from our side and from Tharawat especially, also to thank you for such an honest and open sharing of your own experience and of course of the story of your family business. Over to you, Martin.
Yes, thank you. And I really, really appreciate your time being with us today. And I want to give you the chance for a final thought to give to our audience here. And that is reflecting on, now that you've gone through that experience, now that you've sort of gotten the responses and reactions, what is your recommendation, to other family businesses in the region if they want to do the same? So in a nutshell, if you had, 20 seconds, the typical elevator pitch, what is your recommendation to people who want to start out?
Well, first of all, it is worth it. The documentation and writing of your family history is worth it. The only thing that I would suggest for anybody who is intending to do it is, number one, start early. Start as early as you can. Document everything, write it down. Don't think that because it's something that you cannot forget, you will just leave it out. Write it down and make sure that you read it once in a while and try to reread and rewrite. That's the first thing. Again, the other thing is that the best thing to start is when the founding father is available. He's still alive, and even if he's not in the business anymore, he can be reached for a reference or a discussion or a debate or some kind of advice. The third thing is, make sure that you decide with your other family members, if they are for going forward with this, what is the level of details that you would like the book or the reference to become? Is it too detailed? Is it going to really go over different leads, like the ones I have done? Or it will be limited to only the business and nothing else? So that's another one. Sometimes you are faced with rewriting parts or even the whole transcript once you find another reference or another proof or another document or a photograph that would give you some other means and other direction of the book. So, but it's worth it. No matter how it is worth it.
I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. That also I would like to thank all our audience for being here. Exceptionally, we're over time, but when it's this interesting, it's really hard to kind of put a stop to the conversation. But I think, let's close on that thought, that it's really worth it to do this work, and that it's worth it probably from a personal perspective, but also from a collective perspective, and that we can really contribute to kind of building these organizations that have a common purpose, a common understanding, and a common vision based in history, and that can move forward into a future together with that understanding. So I think that's really essential and very, very important. Mr. Adel, thank you so much for being here with us today. Family Business Histories would not exist without family members who are willing to share, the depth and the richness of their history. So thank you very much for doing that. I would also thank our audience for being here with us today, for your comments and for your insights. Unfortunately, we were not able to tackle everything, but you can always find FBH if you have questions about any angle that we have covered. And of course, thank you, Martin, for always being a fantastic co-moderator. All right, well, thank you very much, and we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you, and I appreciate the chance to talk to everyone, and God bless.
Thank you very much, sir. Take care. Bye-bye.